The Alberta Tar Sands by Ashley Abdul. So the slideshow is going to be split up into sections. So it's going to include what are tar sands, the Alberta tar sands, the way the oil is being extracted, the positive and negative impacts of extracting oil, and then the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And just to summarize, I'm going to add a mini lesson reflection at the end. So let's begin with what are tar sands. So tar sands are situated underground in which they're filled with a combination of sand, clay, and water. They consist of bitumen. Bitumen is a type of oil that you would find in a tar sand, and some of the most important aspects of tar sands are hydrocarbons and bitumen. Hydrocarbons work together to create this substance bitumen, and it is said to be a bit unclear but believed that oil sands are created through organisms falling to the bottom of the sea, in which case they have been decomposed into oil forms through heat and pressure, and this decomposition fed off other molecules in the sand and created hydrocarbons. So, what are hydrocarbons? Hydrocarbons are a mix of hydrogen and carbon ions. They can exist in any form, solid, liquid, or gas. Most oils and natural gases are created through hydrocarbons. The amount of hydrocarbons combined impacts its true amount of energy. It the energy that it emits, and through this, the more likely it is to become a solid or liquid. So, just to clear up that last point, the amount of hydrocarbons combined impacts its true amount of energy. So, depending the amount of energy that it emits, it's more likely to become a solid or a liquid. Hydrocarbons are an essential part of this lesson because without it, bitumen, the main ingredient, we can call it, to tar sands, is created through hydrocarbons. In order to avoid using a Google image, I created my own hydrocarbon. As you can see, it has about 4 carbons and 10 hydrogens, and it creates the substance butane. So now let's talk about bitumen. Bitumen is a form of hydrocarbon that creates crude oil. So it is very thick and viscous, which means it is similar to glue. So it's very thick and gooey, which is the reason it is so difficult to extract. It is also known as asphalt. Chemically, bitumen is made up of mostly carbon, but also has hydrogen. Um, it also includes sulfur and nitrogen. So I provided a graph on the side to represent the amount of chemicals that make up bitumen, so you can get a visual interpretation of the environmental effects later on in the slideshow. So as you can see, carbon represents about 80 to 84% of bitumen. Hydrogen is about 9.8 to 10.8%. Nitrogen is about 0.2 to 1.2%, and sulfur is about 0.9. So specifically, this lesson will focus on the Alberta tar sands, their processes, and the impacts of this oil sands specifically. A brief background of the tar sands is how it will begin. The Alberta tar sands contributes greatly to our economy, which means it's a direct source when we think about the operation of Canada. The three main deposits in which you can find the tar sands are the Athabasca Lake, the Cold Lake, and the Peace River, which is probably why the idea of people saying that they're going to Alberta for work has become a much clearer statement now. During the 18th century, the bitumen was discovered in the area and has provided over 300 million barrels of oil. The bitumen can rest throughout the Precambrian Shield. The bitumen sand is not tightly welded, so it's easier for the bitumen to be squeezed through it. This means that in some areas, it requires more force to extract the oil. The Alberta tar sands are now the fourth largest exporter of oil in the world, and in 2017, it was said they exported nearly 2.7 million barrels per day. So here's an image of what the land looks like, the Alberta tar sands. As you can see, it's extremely damaged and worn down, completely unsafe, and you cannot live on it. It would take a lot more than some care to restore the land. The hot water process. Tar sands are extracted through the hot water process. Although this process includes a lot of damage to the environment, it is seen as a much more cost-effective way to do things. The process has various steps. It starts by mining the oil sands with trucks and shovels in order to create lumps and ensure there is easier access to the oil. The lumps are then combined and crushed with fresh water, often from the Athabasca Lake, into mixing boxes, stir tanks, cycle feeders, or rotary breakers. The product created is known as slurry. The slurry is processed into pipelines or tumblers where it is broken down into size. Hydrotransport pipelines are designed for the sole purpose to ensure bitumen is broken down as much as possible. As bitumen is high in viscosity, it is mixed with solvents and water in order to minimize this, and the oil is removed. The water used throughout the process is poured into tailing ponds to separate the water and the solid residue. This water is then recycled until there is no water left. This process requires at least 3 to 4 barrels of water per 1 barrel of bitumen. So these two images go over the hot water process and the tailing ponds. So just a little brief review to what a tailing pond is. It is literally a body of water filled with toxins, and these ponds are specifically created through oil extractions. And also, just to expand on the hot water process, you can see through the image the oil is removed with shovels, and then it goes through the pipes and is transformed into the slurry, and then it is removed either into a tailing pond, and then the bitumen is placed into a different section in order to be processed and created into crude oil. The steam-assisted gravity drainage. This drainage system is much more simpler and less damaging to the environment in comparison to the hot water process. So it does still affect the environment, but it's just not as bad as the hot water process. In order for the steam-assisted gravity drainage process to work, it first begins by inserting two wells into the ground. And they're not connected, but they're strategically placed about 4 to 6 meters apart from one another. The one placed on the top, as you can see, it kind of looks like little popcorns. Um, that is the steam well. So the steam well is used to lower the viscosity of the bitumen, so the oil producer, or the production well, the one placed underneath, can remove more oil. So the steam works to kind of soften it up, and then it kind of melts down. So the term gravity drainage in the title refers to the action in which the bitumen drains downward into the production well. The oil and steam from both pipes are sent back to the plant, and the water from the steam injector is recycled. So the image on the right shows both the steam well and the production well, as I explained previously. So here's an example of a steam-assisted gravity drainage in Alberta. So if you were to go to the tar sands, this is exactly what it looked like. Still very damaging to the environment, but just not as bad as the hot water process. So now moving along, I would like to go over the negative impacts of the Alberta tar sands. So let's start with water consumption, specifically the amount of water consumed in the hot water process as well as the gravity drainage process. It uses nearly 3 to 4 barrels of water per gallon of oil. It is noted that there is a great amount of fresh water available within Alberta for the use of tar sands oil extraction. As global warming is on the rise, the amount of water available is decreasing. Although this is a con, there is also a set limit of water by the Alberta government as to how much can be used on a day-to-day basis. I've included a graph which displays the allocation of water in Alberta. 8% of 8% of the fresh water goes to oil sands, and considering only 2% of the world has fresh water, only 2% of the world's water is fresh. Not only is this using a lot of water, it's contaminating the fresh water as well through things like tailing ponds and just dumping residue and things like that into areas that we need drinking water from. So if you are exporting nearly 2.4 million barrels of oil per day, you are using about a maximum of 9,600,000 barrels of water per day for this extraction. So moving on, let's talk about the water quality. As the amount of water consumed is a major issue for tar sands, the quality of water within the basins and rivers in the area have an increasing amount of polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons, also known as PAH, also referred to as polycystic aromatic compounds, PACs, in the water. These are organic compounds, which means they are found within living organisms. PACs can be found in the bitumen and are released into the water through the extraction process as the water is recycled on an ongoing basis into the tailing ponds. Once the extraction process happens, there's an obvious increase in the erosion of bitumen in the area. Through natural weathering processes, the extraction impacts causes these sediments to be transferred into the fresh water. This causes extreme harm to habitat life within the waters, but also the people who rely on the freshwater sources within the surrounding communities. This is obviously a major issue because water is a necessity to life, and if we are contaminating these areas, in the future there will be a shortage. Air pollution. So, due to this viscosity level of bitumen, it requires a great amount of machinery to complete the process. It means that it creates a great deal of air pollution due to the fact that it has to work extra hard. Throughout the area of the Athabasca River, there is a large amount of indigenous people who live in the surrounding areas. The area includes, and I quote, heavy machinery and wide loads, and is notorious for its motor vehicle facilities. End quote. Due to the process needed to complete the extracting, it needs a great amount of energy to complete the project, therefore releasing a tremendous amount of damaging chemicals into the air, making it unhealthy for citizens to live in the area. Evidently, greenhouse gases emitted through the machines used to emit about 9.3% of Canada's greenhouse gases, which sounds like a little amount, but considering the size of Canada, that's an insane amount of greenhouse gases just to come from Alberta's tar sands. Although everything may have its downfalls, there are also positives in every situation. So, in the Alberta Tar Sands, I would like to give a brief overview of the positive impacts that it makes in not only Alberta, but all over Canada. So, oil literally makes the world go round and it impacts the functionality of our day to day basis. For example, you can find oil in everyday items, you can find it in diesel, airplane fuels, and even gas. So, diesel oil would be used in things like trucks. You can find it in the gas that we put in our cars. You can find it in the airplane fuel, as I said. So, to make the planes fly, you use crude oil. It could be put into plastic. It can be put into tar. So when you see people making the roads, there is crude oil and asphalt in that. You can also find it in things like paints and dyes. Not only paints and dyes, you can also find it in chemicals. So household chemicals, for example, like Windexes and things that you clean the bathroom with. You can find it in a lot of those. And also, it is used as a lubricant for extremely big machinery. So, even the machines that they use to extract the oil, you can find bitumen and crude oil in that. I believe I did speak on this a little bit before, but I just wanted to revisit it because it's so important. The economic benefits that the Alberta tar sand provides to Canada is probably one of the main reasons they will never stop trucking oil out of the ground because it is one of our biggest employers, employing nearly 400,000 workers per year. And in 2014, as again I did say this before, it provided 2.3 million barrels of oil per day, which is why Canada is nearly the leading producer of oil in the world. So they provide jobs, they create revenue for the country, but they also create a lot of international relations. So, in terms of international relations, this means that they work to create, I guess, allies with other countries. So they are able to export oils to these countries, bringing money into the country, also providing jobs for people out of the country, bringing immigrants in um, to get that extra step into the economy. So I just wanted to provide this graph that I found on Statistics Canada from 2012. It says that it's called the Total Primary Energy Supply by Source 2012, and 32.8% of our energy supplier was crude oil, which is what we extract from the ground. So I just thought this was a really interesting point. I just wanted to show you a visual interpretation of how much energy that crude oil and the tar sands does provide. So moving along, I just wanted to talk about the CCS. So the CCS stands for carbon capture and storage. So this is using technology to provide sustainability for the country. Um, so this aims to reduce the biggest con, which I discussed earlier. Basically, the CCS uses thermal electricity to power the machines used to extract the oil. In terms of the steam assisted gravity drainage and the CCS, and I quote from the same Canada.ca document, these technologies use solvents in conjunction with steam or employ radically new technologies such as heating the bitumen through electricity to move the bitumen towards the wells. This helps to ensure efficiency and preserve the water that we do have. So now I'm going to move on to the Trans Mountain Pipeline extension. So the Trans Mountain Pipeline extension is probably the biggest controversy in relation to this issue. So over the years, there has been an ongoing debate as to whether or not the expansion is worth it or if it's not worth it. So the biggest issue is the environmental footprint it makes on the world and Canada, but also the opposing opposition as to whether or not the economic benefit is worth the damage. If we were to extend the pipeline, it would probably increase the amount of oil that we produce, nearly double the amount, because they're pretty much doubling the pipeline. So the expansion would allow for more pipeline pumping in areas in both Alberta, British Columbia, and Washington. So they would be able to open up the pipeline, extend the pipeline, and have more pumping stations. So the pipeline would expand from about 1,147 kilometers of various pipelines to literally opening up an identical pipeline running through the same areas. So I'm going to insert a little diagram in order for you to get a visual expansion of the pipeline. So just to get into a little more of the specifics, this is what the pipeline extension would look like. So the orange line is the extension. The green dots are the new pumping stations. So they've added about 980 kilometers of new pipeline and about 12 more pump stations. So this obviously means an increase in jobs, an increase in revenue, and an increase of efficiency to get the job done much faster than what it's doing now. So it's obviously, as you can see, considering the pipeline before the extension, how much of an environmental impact it had, you can only imagine the increase in things like emissions of greenhouse gases and things like that would also increase. So I'm going to actually move right along into the impacts of the extension of this pipeline. Looking from a very important point of view, an environmentalist point of view, the impacting of increasing the amount of oil the pipeline can provide has the biggest impact on these factors. Increasing chances of oil spills, increases oil tanker traffic, increasing our water usage, and increase in greenhouse gases. The expansion of the pipeline is hurting citizens all over Canada. It is impacting the amount of water we have and the quality of water that we provide. It's impacting the air we breathe and it is polluting our communities. And the land that we live on specifically, people living in these areas may have to migrate to different parts of not only the province, but maybe even the country because of because of their environmental views. And also their importance on their health and safety. The pipeline hurts people now before the extension, and after the extension, its level of problematic issues will nearly double. In summary, we went through various topics in the presentation. We went through bitumen being made through hydrocarbons. It's been extracted through two ways: the steam-assisted gravity drainage and the hot water process. We went through some pros, that it provides economic benefits and also the functionality of the world. And one of the biggest cons, it's environmentally damaging. There's an extensive amount of operating machinery and trucker transportation sending off greenhouse gases, polluting our ozone layer and the air we breathe. The oil directly contaminates our fresh water supply. Our natural resources are on a decreasing streak, and the Alberta Tar Sands is a major contributor. Canada needs to work together to either establish alternatives to crude oil or alternatives to the extraction of bitumen before it is too late.